classes while she was here, and I learned an awful lot from her in that process. We've run into each other at various COPs and other sorts of climate negotiation sessions in different parts of the world. And now to have her come talk to us about her work in Costa Rica and how that connects to things going on in other countries is just terrific. Monica was born in Costa Rica, but has lived in Norway and the UK and the US and a number of other places. She did her bachelor's and master's at Costa Rica National University and a master's and PhD here. She's worked for some of the most interesting organizations that are out there working on climate matters, including James Cameron's Climate Change Capital, the OECD, our Yale Center for Environmental Law and Policy. And then in 2014, she founded a group called Nivela, a thought leadership group based out of Costa Rica focused on clean development. She's also connected to a bunch of other networks. So she's going to talk today about co-creating a fossil-free society. But before I leave that, she's also has this cool opportunity, as I understand it, to go to Antarctica this December and check that out as part of a group of 78 women as part of the Australian Homeward Bound expedition. So as you can tell, a very, very interesting person working on very, very interesting things. Please join me in welcoming Monica Araya.
Okay. I don't think I need to use this. Thank you, Brad, for the introduction. Brad and I developed a very, very nice bond. You know, when you are here for nearly 8 years, I was here 2 years as a master's student, and then 5 years as a PhD student. And 1 year I was just working and living here in New York. Brad was that kind of person that sometimes comes and says, you know, Monica, we're going to take you for dinner tonight because you've been sleeping too many nights in your office, and that's not a good idea. So, for example, I was so intensely embedded in my bubble, you know, in my PhD bubble, that I used to sleep in my office in a house that is across here, that's across the street. And I remember in the weekends, I would just have the house for myself because obviously nobody was working there. And I came to a point where I even lost track of the days. So I came on Sunday in my pajamas to the first floor just to realize it was Monday. So I'm like, what are you doing here? So it was very intense, and I'm very happy to be back, and I'm very grateful that you took the time to be here. What I want to do today is to tell you a few stories and talk about how to co-create a fossil-free society. And of course, I'm going to talk about Costa Rica because that's my country. But I don't want you to just see this as a Costa Rican story. If you are from South Africa, or if you are from the US, or from the UK or Argentina, the whole point is to have a conversation on how to make this happen regardless of our passports. And I'm going to start this conversation. Oh, if somebody tweets, that's my Twitter account. I know that we live in a world of bloggers and Twitter, people who tweet, so I don't mind if you tweet. Oh, clearly. So I'm going to start with this slide. And this is a number that had a very strong impact on me in my work. So 33 days is the amount of days that our intern is wasting in congestion in Costa Rica a year. So if you think about it, I met a person that for 33 days is doing nothing but stuck in traffic, just like sitting in a chair going at 7 kilometers, 12 kilometers per hour, and wasting her time and her energy and her quality of life. And that to me is very important because she has a name. Her name is Glenda, and she's a good person. The kind of person who comes and says, I want to work for your organization for free for a summer. Somebody like you who cares about sustainability, and somebody who is studying. So she lives here and she studies here. So going from here to here is 2 hours in 2 buses every day, and then coming back home is 2 hours in buses. And it's about it's less than 30 kilometers. And I really want to keep this in mind, because even though we are going to talk about how to build a fossil-free society, this conversation is not about just energy systems and the atmosphere and this big scheme of things. It's about the puzzle is how to get rid of fossil fuels while building countries that are good countries, where Glenda has the freedom to go from A to B quickly, where she has the freedom to choose how she wants to get there, with a bike, with an electric bus, with a metro. It's also about freedom. And I want to keep her in mind, because at the end, as I said, at the end of the day, that's the puzzle. The puzzle is not just about getting rid of fossil fuels. It's about how to connect the dots to people like her, because it's good people, right? So we want good people to have good lives. And the work that I do as Costa Rica Limpia, or as Nivela, we can talk a little bit more about what Nivela and Costa Rica Limpia do. What we do has a lot to do with these 3 things, and I call it translation, or you have to translate, and I'm going to talk about what that means. We also do a lot of work around reframing things, challenging the stories, telling different stories. And of course, the other thing is our co-creation. And we're going to talk about these 3 things, but I want you to keep them in mind, because these are like the big clusters that organize the work that we do. So the starting point is this idea that we have to find common language. And I'll give you a very concrete example. About 2 months ago, I had to go to a very big room of exporters, people who make a lot of money in my country, very powerful people. And they asked me to stand up in front of them and explain to them this whole thing related to the Paris Agreement. Can you come and talk to us about this? Can you explain to us what's going on? And 2 weeks later, I have to go to a very remote area in Costa Rica near Panama and talk to kids who are like 14, 15, rural kids who don't even know that a Paris Agreement has been agreed, or let alone ratified. So it is my responsibility to find a language to talk to the exporters and to talk to these kids. And what I have noticed a lot in a lot of the climate work that is happening is that we expect people to speak our language, and it is the other way around. We have to speak their language. And I think when it comes to climate, we really lack that common language, so we have to create it. And that's what we've been building in Costa Rica with our organization, that kind of common language, because, I'll tell you how a conversation goes in Costa Rica when you don't translate. So you have a room full of citizens, and then you have somebody who says, okay, first slide, please. Can you connect it? Yeah. Okay, first slide. The first slide says NDC. NDC. So the person expects the citizen to know what an NDC is. Oh, and by the way, we're going to do 5 namas. Never mention what a nama is. And you start losing the language, the people, and then you start observing people, and then they start tweeting, and then you lose them. And never once did this person think that the person in front of them didn't even know what an NDC was, nationally determined contribution. And so I spent a lot of time listening to how people talk about climate change in our elections, in the morning programs, in TV. And I actually believe that Paris is something that has not been translated. It's very easy to be very dismissive of something you don't understand, precisely because you don't understand it. And a lot of the language that is using, that a lot of the conversations around Paris that are dismissive is by people who never even took the time to understand what happened in Paris. So we have spent a lot of time telling the Paris story. And basically what we tell people, because you have to remember, this is, Costa Rica or Colombia or Chile, it's emerging economies. It's the moment where people are excited because the economy is growing, we're becoming more developed, we have more money. And we basically say to people, look, this whole thing of climate change can be very complicated. But keep in mind two basic things, very, very basic. There is something we have to decrease and something we have to increase. And we have to decrease emissions. We have to decrease pollution. We really have to. And it's about energy systems, and we can get into that conversation, but when we say decarbonization is a good thing, because that's the other thing. The minister has been talking about decarbonization and never explained what it is. I mean, even if you go to the Spanish dictionary online, the official dictionary, and you type decarbonización, descarbonización is not even in the dictionary. So that really tells you how we are in bubbles, right? So we say when you hear decarbonization, it's mostly cleaning up the country. It's getting rid of pollution. It's getting rid of those emissions that create climate change. But that's not enough, because if you are stuck in a part of the country that is prone to floods, for example, and these floods get worse, basically you also want the country to have a system that manages those impacts. And therefore, we are also going to talk about resilience. And we're also going to tell you that resilience is a good thing, and we have to increase our ability to be resilient. So depending on the audience, we navigate between this, and in some cases, it's easier to go through them. For example, if it's exporters, the hook is resilience, of course, because they will always argue they are small and they don't create that many emissions. But with some other audiences, you want to talk about decarbonization. And in our work, we also use a lot of images. And basically, where is the pointer here? The country, at least Costa Rica, is much more advanced when it comes to this. And the big trauma has come when public opinion has discovered that doing this doesn't protect you for impacts. So this other part, I'm not going to talk about this second part in my talk, but my point by starting with this is that I'm fully aware that you have to do both. So in a way, with the two organizations, I try to combine in this kind of world, it's a lot of international people who care deeply about multilateralism, people who are based, for example, in Brazil or Colombia, and they know that we have to develop, and they know that we have to do, that we have to create jobs and create infrastructure, but we also challenge the idea that you have to do it the dirty way. And then with Costa Rica Limpia, basically it's about citizens. It's less about like analytical frameworks. It's more organic. It's more about going to people and telling them, this is what we think, but we want to hear what you think. Don't just sit there and listen to us. You also want to talk, and you also want to tell us about your aspirations. So these are two things, that I created, and it was very important at some point being at FES, because you are in a place where you learn that if you don't find a job you want, then you just have to create it, right? You don't have to wait for that job to arrive. You just have to make sure that you also create it for yourself. And in that process, you bring other people. So I still have the impression that, at least in Latin America, we haven't really understood what happened in Paris. You still go to a lot of conferences on infrastructure, energy systems, GDP growth, where the conversation is pretty much business as usual. So we have to be very, very persuasive in making sure people understand what happened. And we need to help them understand why this was possible in 2015 in ways that were unthinkable in 2009. I was in 2009 in Copenhagen. In fact, I met my husband Björn, who's sitting there, who's from Norway. And in 2009, people were crying the last evening. It was very frustrating. People were very, very upset. The society I mean, society was asking politicians to have an agreement, and politicians went back and said, guys, we're not ready. We can't do it. Sorry, we don't have the conditions. And it was frustrating. So one of the things we haven't spent enough time explaining to people is why is it that something is possible in 2015 that wasn't possible in 2009, right? And there were many ways of explaining that. But there were things happening that were unthinkable. And that's a good thing. It means that something shifted, that we are able to shift society, shift ideas. Like this was unthinkable in 2009, but this is a big part of the puzzle. You know, this is a big part of the story with that two big countries that have a lot of pollution were able to agree. Two countries that at the same time are doing a lot of renewables and also good things. You also had this very interesting battle between the investments that are about outdated energy systems and the new investments. And basically, you had investors trying to win the case that an agreement was necessary. You also had, I don't know, how many of you were in Paris? Apart from James. And did you see the shoes? This was very creative. And actually, I know the person who came up with this idea. As you can imagine, Paris at the time of the COP was under a lot of stress because of the terrorist attacks a few weeks or a few days before. So the big march where people were going to come and say to politicians, don't you dare live in Paris without an agreement, couldn't happen. So the idea was to make sure politicians could feel the citizen pressure without doing a march because the police would prohibit it. And this was amazing. There was in one of the most emblematic parts of Paris, people came and put their shoes through a bus. And basically it was a quiet but creative way of telling politicians, we are watching you, we are here, don't forget us. And this is very important because we have to be part of this. It can't be just politicians doing things. We actually have to take the time to make sure they know we are there. Another interesting dynamic was this whole thing of mayors of cities saying, you don't want to agree on climate action? We're ready, you know? And you could see it, for example, in big countries. You know, you had a big contrast, for example, in Brazil, where you have, you know, a president was very passive about climate change, full of excuses. Oh, you know, we're developing, we have to be dirty. You know, completely unacceptable for a country to say that to its citizens. And then the mayor of Rio was like, oh yeah, you don't want to do that? I'll do it in Rio. Had the same thing in a place even like Norway. That doesn't happen just in developing countries, where the mayor of Oslo said, I actually think the target that Norway has chosen is not good enough. So if you're not going to do it as Norway, I'm going to show you as mayor of Oslo that I can go farther. So mayors were very important and are very important. I also saw them a few days ago in Quito, in Habitat. Have you tracked the whole thing around Habitat? It's fascinating. Almost 40,000 people registered to go to a conference on urban futures, you know, and then the stars of that environment are not ministers, but mayors. And of course, in telling the story to citizens, it's easier to tell a story when people can associate the story with visuals. And now that the visuals around renewables are very powerful, right? You have stories every day, like Morocco is going to launch the largest solar plant in the world. You have stories in Chile. Chile is going to have the largest PV solar plant in Latin America. It has the cheapest electricity ever in Chile, you know, ever. Not clean electricity, period. You know, the cheapest ever happened in Chile, and a few weeks later, the record was broken in Abu Dhabi. Honduras, you know, the largest solar plant in Central America. So there is something there in the stories, in the visuals, that is getting people the sense that something is happening. You know, this is not just an agreement, it's part of a transition. And then, of course, very interesting stories about China becoming the largest solar manufacturer in the world, also the largest generator. And then, and this is a very key part of the story, it's very easy to be cynical. And it's very annoying because it's just, you just sit there and you start saying, I don't believe in anything. Nothing is happening. Everything is getting worse. The Paris Agreement doesn't make any difference. The world is corrupt. You know, in this kind of narrative, which is really energy draining. And it's very important to challenge people who say that nothing is happening. Because what they always forget is that it's been 200 years of dirty infrastructure. So of course the installed capacity out there is dirty. I mean, that's not the point. The point is that if you look at what happened around 2013 is something extremely important, which is that for the first time ever, what the world is installing is renewable in terms of new capacity. This never happened before. And so we have to find a way of looking at the trend lines, not just the headlines, right? We have to be able to say, how do we make this happen faster? Oops. In terms of numbers, it's also very important to be very accurate because, again, when you go to these public debates, people will say, oh, you know, but the oil and gas industry is so powerful, you know, they are always winning. And you have to show, as the IEA showed, the International Energy Agency showed in the World Energy Investment Report, that this year that just passed, you had a decrease in investments in oil and gas, while an increase in renewable energy. So something is happening. And again, people can be quite skeptical of this because not many people are telling this in terms that people understand. But this effort by the New Climate Economy has been very helpful in Costa Rica. You know, I had to have a session. It was very packed. It was with economists who don't work on climate change. So it's like the Asociación de Economistas. It's like the Association of Economists. Never in the history of the association did they had one talk about climate change. So we organized one for 2 hours. And when they hear that there is a new climate economy commission formed by ministers of finance, presidents, and they talk about these things in economic terms, that is something they find appealing. So where am I going with this? Well, the point is that once you start winning the case that something is happening, that there is a story happening in different countries, that it's not just about an agreement, there are things happening in energy systems, in investments, then the second thing that we do is to say, it's not just about an environmental conversation. So this is not about just making sure that the Ministry of Environment does certain things, because this is our comfort zone in a lot of countries. Oh yeah, let's keep the Paris Agreement and this climate change conversation in the box, the very reduced box of Ministries of Environment. So we have to break that and say, no, look, we're beyond that point. This is also about infrastructure. This is also about influencing elections. This is about how you teach at university. And this slide here is what I call the taboo slide, because this is what happens. You can go to a conference, say Colombia or Peru, and you can win a lot of friends, lots of friends, by talking about renewables. I mean, who is going to be against solar energy? Very few people. Who's going to be against, like cleaner energy? Just people who work in the fossil fuel industry. But the instinct is to say, no, that's pretty cool, So you can have a whole discussion around this and make a lot of friends, okay? The difficulty is to go to a place like this with more people, like I was in Lima like 3 weeks ago, full of people who do natural gas. And with a smile and a lot of, serenity, or how do you call serenidad, like being polite and quiet, you have to be able to tell them, looking into their eyes, that the world is not about natural gas. You should see what happens in a room when you present this and you say, this is not only about investments here, but it's about unplugging this. even if you invest in this, you have to have this conversation. If you are Ecuador, if you're Norway, you have to have this conversation. And that's why I call it the taboo slide, because that's where you get this moment in our society where people are, oh, I don't want to have this conversation, you know? And then you get into all kinds of mental traps, like, oh, Monica, you know what? It's really great what you're doing, but there is something you don't understand. You really don't understand. What you don't understand is we're really stuck with oil. You really have no choice. They will also tell you, oh, but natural gas is really clean, because obviously they are comparing with coal. So even in a country like Costa Rica, where we have nearly 100% renewable electricity, you have advocates of gas, natural gas, and you still have people, especially from the older generation, having the guts to say that we have to do oil exploration in Costa Rica. I mean, imagine. So my point with this slide is that we have to find in each country, as I said, even in oil-producing countries, a way to have this conversation at dinner. We don't have to have big fights, but this cannot be a taboo. And I have also found that the whole thing with carbon markets it's very uncomfortable for some audiences, because it's all about pricing carbon, but they don't want to talk about getting rid of oil. They just don't. And so this is something that I'm specializing in, you know, how to have this difficult conversation in countries where they don't want to have it. And it's very interesting. It's a human thing, you know, we resist and resent change. And so again, it's going to be difficult, but we have to have it. And in terms of the visuals, I think we have to be able to give people a visual of that transition, you know, like what is it that we need to go, what is it that we have, and what is it that we want to move towards. Again, it's very interesting to talk to people who cannot imagine it. And I don't know whether you've ever had this situation, but I remember talking to a person where, you know, we were stuck in traffic in San Jose. It was very, very frustrating, and he is a taxi driver. So I was trying to ask, you know, I said to him, can you imagine Costa Rica without traffic jams? Can you imagine yourself one day in a park with your family, not in a shopping center, in a park with your family? You don't have any issues. He was giggling. And in the end, he said, I cannot imagine it, because he has never seen it. You know, he has never been out in places where you have these public spaces. So we have to help people believe that this is not something they are stuck with for the rest of their lives. And it sounds very basic if you're in New Haven or if you have lived in like Copenhagen, but it's not that obvious to people who haven't seen it. The other thing that I noticed is brewing in, you know, you can just feel it when you talk to people, is that no matter where you go, it could be Medellin, could be Chile, it could be Costa Rica, people are really getting to a point where they can't stand their tier. Like maybe my generation would say, yeah, well, we're stuck with it. But you start finding all this activism around clean air. And what is very interesting is that it really helps us challenge those who say that we're developing countries and that we first have to grow, and one day when we have the resources, be more like Sweden, you know, one day. Because it's very condescending to say this, because at the end of the day, people who breathe bad air are in developing countries. So how does that work? How can you say to a developing country that trying to be greener is a luxury? And what is very interesting is that if you look at, this is Costa Rica here, right? And this is Chile here. They ran 2 polls of citizens, and they asked them, if you had to choose an environmental priority, what would you choose? So these are citizens here and here, so they don't even know each other. And guess what? In both cases, clean air came as the top one. Second, it was water, And third, in the case of Costa Rica, it was waste, and in the case of Chile, it was noise. But the point is that something is happening with clean air that really plays in our favor, because it really allows us to win allies in this difficult conversation on fossil fuels and what they can, what they do to health. And you see a very rapid evolution of activism. So, for example, in the left, we have China, and there is a lot of activism there around clean air. And then on this side, you have Colombia. They have won battles, such as being able to ride their bikes on Sundays. You see no cars here. Somebody could be very dismissive and say, well, who cares? This is just Sundays. This is not the point. The point is the fact that they are saying that city is mine as well. It cannot be cities for cars only. So it has a lot of power in terms of saying to citizens, we won a battle and we are able to have the streets for ourselves at least once a month or once a week. So this is the point where it gets a little tricky, because what we need to do is to, of course, do incremental change. We have to change a little bit here, a little bit there, and we have to celebrate victories. But we cannot continue thinking that it's all about incremental change. And that gets really tricky when you work with ministries. Because in ministries, you have a lot of incrementalism. And that's understandable and it's fine. But sometimes people working in ministries are the first ones who say, oh, no, but we can't get rid of fossil fuels ever. We need to do a little bit of less fossil fuels, a little bit more of renewables, and that's the best we can aspire to. So we have to be able to challenge a lot of that thinking and say, well, but we have been very transformational when it comes to other things, right? Look at what we lived through. Maybe not you guys, because you're so young, but some of us actually lived through, I remember living in a world without smartphones, and I remember living in a world where you had to use faxes. So we have done a lot of pretty transformative things in our lifetimes. Why is it that when it comes to energy and cars, we still have to live with being stuck with an internal combustion engine or with dirty energy, right? Like, we have to be able to say to people, there is one transformation that we will see in this generation. And I think this image to me is important. It's very important for my work, because it summarizes that disruption that I want to see completed in my own life. And I really believe that this transition from a world that uses oil for cars and buses to a world where you can go from A to B using electricity is doable. Is technologically doable. If we don't get it done, it's because of other reasons. And again, here I don't want to get into the boring debate of, oh, but Tesla is very expensive. Oh, but Tesla, I don't care about Tesla as a company. It's great, but my point here is not to tell you to buy a Tesla. So please, that's not the point, okay? Because I have given this, and I notice people don't want to hear the story. So they say, oh, but Tesla is for rich people. Why are you putting this? That's not the point. The reason why I think this image is important is because it has been very, very bold and disruptive to go out there and say, here it is something that would allow you to operate in a city without using any fossil fuels. And this has been so powerful in terms of capturing the people's imagination that in Costa Rica, you don't have a single Tesla, not even one. And there is already a fan page called Tesla Costa Rica. Why? Because it did something to people, to their minds. It basically allowed them to think, wow, you can actually start thinking that a car with gasoline is a little bit like a fax, right? Like something that will be a part of the past. And mind you, we have a bill in Congress right now to promote electric mobility. You have no idea, in a tiny country like Costa Rica, the lobbying against it by the oil the people who import oil and people who import oil cars. You have no idea what's going on. I mean, it's quite annoying because we could do better. But the point here is to really help people understand that this expensive car story that so many people love to have and love to mock is very transformational, because by 2022, electric cars and normal cars will cost around the same. So nothing that we see today is just going to stay the same. It is not incremental change. This is going to be, it's not going to be linear change. This is pretty disruptive. And that's why it's fascinating to start seeing all these articles about how electric cars can be a big headache for the oil industry. And in terms of connecting the story to Glenda, this woman that I showed you in the beginning, I personally believe that a country could really make a big change if it makes a commitment to changing, for example, all the buses, right? Imagine if we in Costa Rica were able to agree that in the next 5 years we're going to get rid of I had a picture, but it comes later, get rid of buses that are polluting and that are insulting. Because this is also about dignity, like why is it that we still live in a world where if you have to go in in a bus, nobody cares. You don't exist as a constituency. Politicians don't really care much about people who use buses in developing countries. They care a lot about infrastructure for exporters. If you want to justify something like a port or an airport or a highway, you will say this is good for exports, so let's do it. But we don't have enough advocates of public transportation. And this is something where I spent a lot of time thinking, how can we make sure we change our buses and this is out there. It's not science fiction. It's not something that has to be created. It's something that is already there. So again, going back to reframing, one of the things that we're saying to a lot of people is that they need to be more effective in questioning the new investments. Are the new investments in roads, in infrastructure, Paris compatible? Is your mayor thinking about these things? Is my city Paris compatible? We just had a fascinating debate in Medellin, Colombia, 2 weeks ago. It was all about cities. People from different countries came. And it's, we are all in different countries coming to the same conclusion. How do we connect the Paris story with our city story? How do we start from this year onwards really asking tough questions in the elections? This is something we plan to do next year when we start preparing for the next election. We want to come to a point where our candidates don't go through an election avoiding all these questions about decarbonization, resilience, investments in fossil fuels or divestments from fossil fuels. And so the landing point of this is that people still believe that somebody is going to fix this, right? Someone. So I want to vote for that person, or I want to meet that person. And what we are trying to help people see is that we have to be all part of that. But it's hard, I don't know in your environment, but I come from an environment where people are still in the mindset that somebody's going to have to come and fix congestion. Somebody's going to have to fix the problem with the water. And so this co-creation mindset, building this co-creation mindset is almost as difficult as building technology, because it's a mass psychology that has been there for many, many decades. So when I say co-creation, what do I mean by that? Co-create what? Well, I think of at least 3 things. So we need to co-create demand, demand for these buses, demand for these zero pollution cars. We need to co-create demand for more public transportation as opposed to private car infrastructure. Because if you just wait for the supply to react, supply and demand, if you just wait for the suppliers of ideas in government or in think tanks to do this, well, we might have to wait too many years, because they are not necessarily thinking, terms of transformational change. They are thinking in terms of incremental change. The other thing that we need to create is intelligence, co-create intelligence, because the myths that you will hear from the incumbents are outrageous. I can tell you a few examples of what they are already saying about electric mobility in Costa Rica. And then basically the strategy is to scare people away. So we have to be very good at creating our own intelligence and say, no, wait a second, sir. We don't need 10,000 charging stations in Costa Rica that will cost you that amount of money. We need 300 supercharging stations. And then we have to co-create coalitions, And the more hybrid, the better, because we tend to create coalitions around like-minded people, and sometimes because we are in our own bubble, then when we go to the real world, the coalition doesn't work. So creating demand starts with the story, and that's why the whole thing I've been telling you is about telling those stories. I was able to do the TED Talk, and that has been very helpful in Costa Rica because it's in English, it's out there, then the people feel that there's a story that Costa Rica can tell, and it has opened a lot of doors at home. But again, it's a storytelling. In 15 minutes, tell a story. And I encourage you to always ask yourself, what's the story I'm telling? Is it working? And how do you want people to be part of that story? That's something that we need to get better at. So in the case of Costa Rica, the story is very emotional. Because, you go to a Costa Rican and say, this is our country. This is our electricity, guys. Why on earth, if we have hydro, if we have geothermal, if we have wind, if we have solar, if we have biomass, why? Really? Why are we going to keep importing oil? Tell me. Why? And the key point will come when we agree on when to stop buying gasoline cars and gasoline buses, and gasoline trucks and all that. But the point is you can't just get to people through their mind. You also have to get through their emotions. And then, of course, in the case of Costa Rica, I'm not saying this has to be your story, but if this is a room full of Costa Ricans, I do a lot of talking to rooms with with a lot of Costa Ricans. You also have to say, look, we inspire others. Why not? Let's be the country that inspires, not because we're perfect, and we have to insist on that. It's not about perfection. It's about getting something faster than other countries. We also have a good story when it comes to Cristiana Figueres, Why is it that if almost 200 countries try to agree something, you have this woman from a small country trying to be the bridge. It wasn't just her alone, but the fact that she's Costa Rican is very empowering, especially for girls, to hear that a Costa Rican woman plays such a key role in a global negotiation. And in terms of people who do numbers, that's where you have to get tough and say, look, yes, we are the country of the green energy story, but this is our energy system in Costa Rica. Great, this is renewable. But this red thing here, this is cars. This is not buses. This is cars, guys. 5% increase in sales every year. All our status symbols are related to cars. So when I say that we have to go fossil-free, we have to figure out what to do with all these cars and how to build a society that is not centered on private cars. That's why the public transportation system is so important. And we have the numbers. This is a study we did with Ilmi Granov, who studied here. Ilmi had a great time in Costa Rica. It was so great to work with him, and it's just this is the fun part of FES, and years later you bumped into someone and he's like, yeah, let's do it. And he's been great. He's been really great. But you see, this is our car fleets going up. This is our emissions. So we have low emissions, yes, but all our emissions every year, these green bars this is gasoline. So if we manage to get electric mobility, we will be able to do a lot for our Paris targets. And on top of that, then we go back to Glenda, the girl that I mentioned. When I tell you that she's spending 33 an equivalent of 33 days a week stuck in traffic. You know why that is? Because she's in a bus like this, stuck there. And the lobbying against exclusive lines for buses has been so powerful that we haven't been able to do the exclusive lines for buses for 15 years. It's outrageous. You know, it's really outrageous that there are no champions of public transportation. So my heart is increasingly split between fossil-free and congestion-free. You know, I can't do one without the other, because we have to solve this puzzle together in terms of not doing just one. And this is something that is so common in developing countries. You go to Peru, you see it. You go to Chile, you see it. You go to Argentina, to Mexico. I am sure it's the same thing in other continents. But why do we have to accept it, right? So that is the kind of thing we have to make unacceptable. And this is the other thing in terms of co-creation. I love this photo so much. This happened in our citizen consultations as Costa Rica Limpia. He showed up to our citizen consultation with a Superman t-shirt, which I love. It was so symbolic, you know, like the super citizen, you know, like I'm here to, you know, it's this kind of empowering thing. I love it. I love it. And he was there, so I love this photo because this is the new spirit, you know, like I want quality of life, but what do we do, guys, you know? And the we is very important, not just what I do. What do we do? And this is a picture of people. This is like the good people, right? Like we are the ones who have to deal with this, right? And we can't just wait for this to be solved just by technical discussions, because they've been killed every 4 years. Every 4 years there is a plan, every 4 years it's killed. Every 4 years there's a plan, every 4 years it's killed. So we have to figure out this in terms of, you know, what's the role of the good people. For Glenda is somewhere here. This is the one, the previous one was on climate change prior to Paris. This is the one we did on renewable energy and also electric mobility. And we want to do one on transportation. You see, this is the Superman citizen. This is an example of what we do on special occasions. The country is testing this bus, which is zero gasoline. It's electric, 100% electric. So one of the things we're saying to people is, the 15th of September is like a very patriotic day, you know, it's Independence Day. So one of the things we try to push in terms of the narrative is, you know, we want to be free, yeah, celebration of freedom, fantastic. Well, we want to be free from oil, and we want to free from presas, which is congestion. And this is a reframing of our freedom, because by having the system that we have now, we're not free, right? And what is very fascinating is that even in the absence of policies dealing with, you know, a city that belongs to citizens, citizens are already organizing themselves. So we were part of this effort on the 22nd of September, where we launched with so many others a campaign saying, we're not going to use cars. We're fed up of cars. We can have cars, of course, but we don't have to use them all the time. And it was very interesting because it was citizens going to all the ministers saying, can you please make a commitment to come with public transportation just one day to your office? You can walk, use a bike, or please use a bus. And what is fascinating is that the people at the top making decisions on transportation, they never use buses. The ones talking about trains never use trains because the trains are so bad in Costa Rica. And the ones dealing with bikes are saying, I can't visualize a bike path. The minister closed his eyes. It's a true story. It's fascinating. He closed his eyes when he was being asked this question in the press. He just closed his eyes and said, I can't imagine bike paths in Costa Rica. That we're not Europe, guys. That's what he said. And then on Sunday, all these bikers went to this amazing path and had these colorful hats and did a selfie with hundreds of people, sent it back to him, said, you can't imagine the bike paths? Here is the picture. You know, so it's a really interesting process of also, you know, challenging our imaginations. Which one has the bigger imagination? So again, you know, co-creational intelligence, debunking myths. So whenever we say, I love when people tell you that something is 50 years away. I mean, a famous politician famously said, electric mobility is 50 years away. I don't know why he said 50. So then you have to go and say, yeah, really? Why? How come 50? These buses are in Costa Rica and Bogota. We're testing them. We also are helping people understand all this mess with the hybrids and electrics and fiscal incentives, and they really appreciate it. We also tell them, like when people say this is not happening, there is no electric mobility anywhere, then really no electric mobility anywhere. Look at the charging stations in Europe. Look at the charging stations in the US. When people tell you, but the batteries, Monica, the batteries, we haven't figured out the batteries. They are so expensive and they are terrible. Well, they are going down in terms of prices. And in terms of cars, yeah, they are not that many, but they are going up. So getting very good with numbers. Creation of coalitions, hybrids, stop we need to get away from our bubbles. So I'm very, very keen on looking for unusual suspects, people who sometimes are not the natural partners in Costa Rica. If I, like in Costa Rica, if I could tell you horror stories, urban horror stories, they all relate to owners of bus companies, yeah. Horror, like the things they've done. And the reason why I look so happy, I think I look pretty happy, right, is because we're building an alliance with the ones in that very ill ecosystem, with bus owners. And we're saying, guys, some of you will have to be champions, and once you decide to start doing electric buses, we'll be the first ones to celebrate your ability to be different. So we're building this alliance with them, because without the bus companies, we can't win this one. So I'm gonna end up with Glenda, because I believe that the challenge for us who are working in this field is to give ourselves some benchmarks of success. And I would like to, or I choose to believe that in 5 years, our benchmark has to be her. Where is she gonna be in 5 years? Will she still be missing 33 days per year? Is she going to be stuck in traffic? Do you remember the photo I showed you? Is she gonna still be stuck in that kind of world or city or street? And I would like to believe that the work we're doing, yes, it's about meeting the Paris targets. Of course, it's about climate change, but in essence, the test has to be people like Glenda. And we have to be able to really measure our success in terms of how many hours of life she's winning, how many hours of those 33 days per year that she's wasting, how many she's recovering because of our efforts to make public transportation far more attractive, because of our efforts to make sure that people who have cars leave their cars at home during the week. It's not just about using bikes and about getting rid of fossil fuels, it's about changing our habits. And I will leave you with the summary here in the slides. We need to translate into other languages, especially citizen language. We need to reframe issues beyond environmental dimensions. There's sorry. And we need to test it in our decisions on investment, infrastructure. And we need to win this by creating coalitions. Learn to work with others is key. Here are my details. And here's one study that I did with ILMI. It's called Bridging Costa Rica's Green Growth Gap. Several of us, and it can be downloaded in the presentation. So there are numbers there. ODI was there. We have the chairman of the Overseas Development Institute here, James. And I can tell you a lot of stories about James because we work together. So good stories. So thank you so much for listening.
We have time for a few questions, and then we have a reception afterwards.
Sure.
So we have some high school students.
Yeah, it was very good. We met
You've met with them
a
already?
little bit. We didn't have enough time, but
So now's the time to ask questions. One of you, I'm 4C. Who has a question?
well, you just put them on the spot.
Yes, no, it's
Somebody else maybe wants to ask a
I
question.
will ask the first question.
Yeah, sure.
So years ago, maybe when you were here, there was a plan to turn Costa Rica into the first carbon-free country in the world. And I wonder if you think Costa Rica has a chance, or if not, maybe you and James can decide who will be the first country to be carbon-free. It's a huge aspirational goal. It's not clear that anyone actually can do it, but what do you think?
Well, the thing is that if you do a lot of accounting acrobatics, you can be carbon neutral because like a country like mine, if you start getting into the dynamics of forests, you can find a way of saying, we also absorb carbon. And I think when the goal was stated, it was very aspirational because in that context, countries like mine did not have to do climate plans, so it was very bold for a country to say, we want to do this even though we don't have any obligations. And what it did that was very, very good is that right now it's impossible, pretty much impossible, for any company in Costa Rica to be against carbon neutrality in a way that they are allowed to be anti-climate in other developing countries. So it did something to the local mindset. You have a lot of companies that are trying to be carbon neutral voluntarily even before the Paris Agreement. I think in terms of the feasibility, it's a 5 million person country. It's the size of Berlin, Barcelona, it's the size of Boston, it's the size of Guadalajara in Mexico. So in terms of a scale, this is a pretty good we talked about it, remember, the 5, yeah, exactly, is the right size for this kind of bold goal. And so I don't think that we will be carbon neutral in like 3 years, 4 years, but I do believe that if we win the case for the electrification of transportation, we can be. I mean, if you look at, when we say that we could be the first country, at the time, they were thinking a lot about forest offsets. And at the time, it was pretty acceptable. Now it's like, true, but we want to decarbonize deeply, right? So in essence, this, for example, is electrification of cars. This, the gray part here, industry, is basically, Björn has been working on the numbers, but it's basically biomass. I mean, in a country...
Basically 50% of industry is imported bunker fuels and LPG. And offset using biomass to produce heat is actually cheaper. So that's what would it take to make that happen? You would have to make biomass ubiquitously available so you can pick up the phone and you can get it delivered. And it will be cheaper in the long term, but that's quite there.
Yeah.
In terms of cars, people drive 35 kilometers per day.
Nothing.
Studied 95% of cars can now, travels with cars can now be done with electric vehicles. So there's a lot of these barriers that are mental barriers.
But, and I'll tell you something that Ilmi said. That was Ilmi, you remember Ilmi?
Sure.
It was very liberating because, it's always good to have a foreigner looking at your domestic puzzle because they have the detachment, as you get so caught up into it. And so Ilmi went to Costa Rica and this is exactly your question, is it possible? Can we do it? And we, and so people were telling him, no, because it's complicated, you have to get rid of all these buses and all these cars. And then Ilmi turns and says, guys, your biggest problem is the lobby of bus companies, Even the incumbent interests are not like the coal industry or like this kind of like ExxonMobil executives, cooking all this science. So it was liberating in the sense that he wasn't being condescending or anything. He was almost like, guys, come on, like don't get too caught up into your own robes. And I am that school of thought that we have, whenever I see the country thinking, we will never be carbon neutral, it's too many things that we have to change, it's like, again, the size. We're not India that has all these mega populations or all these other bigger problems. So the short answer is that we are still in a space where if we push the boundaries, we can really set a very important precedent. But I think in terms of the essence of the political battle is to be able to organize a debate when the election comes in next year, where this is turned into a national
Good luck.
thing.
We failed totally in making climate a part of our.
Yeah, well, but not every country has Donald Trump, Sorry?
We have a question back here. You have to speak loudly.
Okay, cool. That's kind of my question. I'm Aurora. Thank you so much for coming. I'm a junior and I'm actually from Costa Rica, so
Ah.
I'm here because it's not what I said. But my question is about like making it a national concern. So Costa Rica does a lot of stuff with environmental protection of like forests and animals and things like that. And do you think that humanizing traffic and congestion is like the way to get to people? Because I think that traffic is kind of less of a attractive thing for people to talk about too. So do you think that like the strategy you use in talking about Blenda and like making it very applicable to people is the way to make people care about it?
Well, it's unbearable. I'll tell you a story. A guy who is 31 had a daughter. The daughter is 9, and he has to leave at 5:30 in order to avoid the congestion, 5:30 in the morning. So she's sleeping when she leaves. And then he has to avoid the congestion in the evening, so he leaves the office around 7:30, and when she comes, she's sleeping. He's fed up of that because he doesn't see her from Monday to Friday. I'll tell you another story. This woman, she's in the board of the Commerce Association, the Commerce Association, no, la Cámara de Comercio. So it's like big businesswoman. Doctor tells her she has to get up early and walk. She's she's having a weight problem, so she knows she has to do something, but she has to leave her home at 6 because she has to go to the company that she's running. And if she doesn't leave at 6, she's really stuck there for an hour and a half. So she told me she's killing herself because she can't walk in the mornings. When she comes back, she's fed up of the congestion. She drinks a glass of wine and watches Netflix. I'm just quoting her. She told me, the presa is really killing myself. You have companies that cannot deliver things. For the first time, we have a plane who could not take off because the pilots were stuck in traffic. So it's not about a conversation about transportation, it's about freedom. Right now, I cannot, if it's 4 p.m. and I'm in Curridabat and I have to be here, I physically cannot get there because it's not about taking public transportation. It's that if you remember the picture, the bus is stuck there. So this is something we've been telling the ones who are being very passive because they say, oh, but there is traffic congestion even in Stockholm. It's like, true, there is traffic congestion in Stockholm and in Paris, in London, but if you want to escape it, you have the freedom to take the subway. But you can't, if in Costa Rica right now, there is nothing. There is no metro, there is no tram, there is no, gondolas, the cool things you see in Medellin where you transport people with these cables. I tried them, they are amazing. There is nothing, so it's about, I don't think the conversation is about transport, it's about whether we want to continue with this everyday life loss of freedom and quality of life, and let alone health, because then on top of that, the average age of the fleet is 15 years old, so it's very polluting. So, but I see your point. I think in the last year it has become a topic, just because the presas, the congestion became so unbearable. Yes.
This might be the last question. And then
So I'm Ecuadorian.
I was just in your city.
So I was just wondering, what do you think about the alternative of Pico y Placa being applied to San Jose? Would that be possible? Do you think it would
In
have great consequences? Pico y Placa, you might have heard of that alternative that's used in Quito.
no.
So there, for example, during certain days of the week, and it's also used in, I think, in Bogotá and Medellín. So during certain days of the week, there are, for example, if you have number 9.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, no, we have that. And yeah, we have that. And let me tell you, that this is also about a conversation about how car companies sell their things. So because we have the restriction, Bjorn and I, we don't drive every day because we work at home, so we don't create presa every day. But we definitely would never dream of going there during our constraint, which is Thursdays. We can't drive. Now, the companies that sell cars have ads that say the following, and I'm not kidding you. So there is the ad, beautiful, well, not beautiful, but like traditionally beautiful car, and it says, buy a car with us. The second one has a discount, so you can use it the day of the restriction. So that because the restriction is linked to your plate. So it's if you have another car, you can use it that day. And then the national bank, the official national bank, has an ad with a woman in a bus like this, meaning bad thing, you're using a bus, terrible thing. So the bank says, come to our bank to take a loan for a car so you don't have to use public transportation. So there is so much we have to still do in terms of this constant advertising against using public transportation, because this is what poor people use. This is the connotation in Latin America. I would love to work more with marketing executives in the other, using their skills for our cause. But yeah, we try that and it's not enough. Some people are saying we should have it twice a week, but I don't know.
Okay, I think we should adjourn. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
I was gonna see if Melanie had anything. Okay, we have another reception now. Please join us all.
Yeah, sure. Of course. Hi.